So the Albigenses are from a southern French town called Albi, or at least a large concentration of them. And they're Manichaeans. We covered Manichaeanism as one of our heresies. Does anyone remember what the Manichaeans believe? It was a while ago, I grant you that. I'll give you a hint. They believed that the world was separated, that reality was separated. Not hint enough? That the world was... I was
going to say like the good and the bad.
You're on the right track. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like a bit of opposites.
You're there, almost.
So there was a good God and an evil God.
Yeah, so there's good and bad. There's material and immaterial, or spiritual. That the material is evil, the spiritual is good. So they see what's called a dualistic world. These Albigenses go even further, or the Albigensians, and they even say that the Old Testament, now this is getting really out there, the Old Testament, that's the OT, was written by an evil God. And the New Testament was written by the good God. This is a very strange teaching. Yeah.
Didn't they think the Old Testament God was evil because he killed more people?
Well, yeah, so they look at, like, this is not, the Old Testament God is a wrathful, vengeful God, and not somebody we want to identify with, right? And not to excuse them, but a lot of people, when they read the Old Testament and they look at the horrific stories that are in there, they come away with kind of some of the same feelings. I remember even myself when I was reading the Old Testament, from start to finish the first time, I thought, oh my goodness, a lot of these stories don't get preached in the church, and you're like, holy cow, this is a blood-soaked set of stories, and you have to do a lot of thinking, like, why is this here? Again, not to excuse this, because this is certainly heresy. It's the same God. Certainly different context and time period. And they are against material things, literally. They're against material things. We might say in our modern notion as Christians, we're against material things. We think like, nice fancy cars and boats and fancy clothes and all that, because Christians need to be modest or something. No, that's not what they mean here. They mean actual physical things. So they don't believe in churches, they don't believe in communion, because it's all physical stuff. Now, you might ask, rightfully, well, they're physical things, yeah, but their goal is to become not physical. Right? The goal is to reach a spiritual plane, like to shed the mortal coil, and that everything is working its way to a spiritual end. Now, this is different than the scriptural teaching because you know about the new heaven and the new earth. You know about the new bodies that we'll get, the glorified, resurrected bodies. The Manichaeans are not into that. The Albigensians, by extension, not liking this. Well, the church decides this is a heresy. Well, that's no surprise, because Manichaeanism had been declared a heresy before. But now there's going to be something new. We're going to go after them. And there's special crusades called against the Albigensians in the 1200s. Just like the crusades against Muslims and even eventually over the Eastern Orthodox Christians, these Albigensians had a crusade against them called by a guy named Innocent III, Pope Innocent III. And they marched armies down into southern France and went out and to root out the evil. All right. Another group, the Waldenses. Now these people are completely different. The Waldenses. Where's Waldo? Well, they're named after a guy named Peter Waldo. And you're not going to know this term, but I'll explain it. Are they biblical proto-Jesus freaks? I have to explain. So in the 1960s, there arose a countercultural movement of which you are fairly familiar. Hippies. And hippies, were into experimenting with various forms of consciousness, shall we say. Using certain elements either derived in a lab or probably more associated with Mother Earth. You still following me? They were into New Age-ish ideas and living communally and attending giant rock and roll festivals and, getting themselves in another state of mind. Questioning the system, man. Well, towards the end of the 60s into the early 70s, a lot of those hippies were getting totally burned out. And some of them, shaved and went back to college and got corporate jobs and became, doctors and lawyers and respectable professional people. Others, though, continued the hippie thing, but took it in the direction of the gospel. And there was a movement of the late 60s, but really early 70s, up to 75, 76 even, called the Jesus Freaks. And they looked every part like hippies. But they were fanatic Jesus followers. They some of them looked like Jesus. In fact, my dad was not exactly a Jesus freak, although he could have been mistaken for one for some of his time. He became, during this time period, he left his position as a pastor and he got into rock and roll music because that was his real passion. And he began promoting concerts, but he stayed in the realm of the faith. And so he was one of the early guys in this new thing called Christian rock, which you guys know nothing about, or CCM. And so he was kind of one of the early guys, and he started promoting concerts in Western Canada. And one of the guys that he promoted was, if you meet somebody who's really, really into old school Christian rock music, the kind of Bob Dylan of this was a guy named Larry Norman. And if you Google him sometime, is just like it sounds, Larry Norman. And he was like the Christian rock star, if there was one, but completely humble and didn't live that lifestyle. But he's kind of famous within Christian rock music circles, if there is such fame. But I remember as a young child coming downstairs in our house in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and seeing Larry Norman for the first time, but kind of seeing him in profile, and I came down and I went, because I'd never seen anybody look like him. He had like kind of this kind of fringy leather coat on and this really luscious flowing hair, and he looked like Jesus. And I'd already had some confusion as a kid because I'd gone to sermons, because we lived in Calgary then, and I remember feeling very, very proud that Christ died in Calgary. I misheard it. No, Christ died on Calvary. But I knew that I lived in Calgary. And I thought, oh man, we live in where Jesus died. And no, okay. Anyway, I was confused. But now I come downstairs and there's Jesus in Calvary. Anyway. Now, Larry Norman was a Jesus freak. And so they lived simply, and that's what the Waldenses do. They live simply, they sell everything, they wander around preaching the gospel, they give to the poor, they think any church or any place can become a church. Now we have versions of Jesus freaks still to this day. In fact, there is a major Jesus freak outpost downtown Chicago. They own a huge high-rise that they live in communally, and they're called Japuza. Has anyone heard of Japuza? Jesus People USA. They have this huge high-rise. They have their own rock and roll band that tours around. They're called the Res Band. Nobody? You might see them once in a while. Some of them are associated with Moody Bible Institute. You may have heard about that. But they have this thing where if you join Japuza, you get to live in their little high-rise, and they're in the pretty cool part of downtown Chicago on the north side. But you live communally. You give up your items. You share with them the things that you have. And then they spread the gospel. That's their mission, right? So this is kind of the Waldenses or the Waldensians. Are they biblical? Proto, which means early. Jesus freaks. I don't know, maybe. Yeah.
Can you listen to a song that you would consider?
You know what? I'll play one tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm curious as to what it would be like.
It's. I'll do that.
Awesome.
They believed in a pious poverty. So the criticism of the church was, you guys are too interested in the smells and bells. You know, like Leo X in our film is obsessed with rebuilding St. Peter's and having, everything dripping in gold and jewels and stuff like that, and collecting indulgences. So that is not at all what the church is about. That's not Jesus' mission. So they're into a pious poverty. They sell everything they own and they preach the gospel, and they just kind of walk around. And they don't need a fancy church because any place can be a church. There is no holy land because it's all holy land. All right. And here's the other thing. This puts them way out there. This puts them way out there. Women can share the word too. This is so far ahead. It's so far ahead. We still are arguing in some of our denominations today whether women can share the word officially as pastors. Now, I know probably in your churches that's not an issue, but there's still places where that's the case. Okay, moving on. The Inquisition. The Catholic Church decides we've got heretics popping up left and right, and we need to fight against it. And so they form an organization called the Inquisition. And the Inquisition is basically the church's attempt to root out, stamp out heresy. And so if you're a heretic, you can be called before a court of inquisition. And it just kind of like what you saw with Luther. And you would say, people are saying this about you. They say you have these beliefs. Is that true? And then depending on your answer, then different things would happen to you. So if you stalled and kind of hemmed and hawed, then they might say, well, we need to kind of put some pressure on you to get the truth out of you. Well, today we call that pressure torture. And so they had a variety of means. They would put you in stress positions. This summer at I snuck away from the main group and I went to the Tower of London, and they had one device that was used. Now this was not used in the Inquisition in England, but similar things where you would be forced to crouch down like this, and then they had this metal iron frame that would be put around you, and you'd be held into this position, and you just stay there for hours and hours and hours, right? Horrifying. Oh, you're back. Okay. And then maybe that would work on your brain and say, oh, okay, maybe I'm a heretic. And if you recanted, then they dust you off, say, welcome back, brother, and you're gone, right? But if you didn't recant, the church then handed you over to the state, because the church doesn't want to be involved in the shedding of blood. And so then what happened to you? Well, you saw it in the film too, that you get burned at the stake at the town gates or something like that. So the Inquisition was intended to stamp out heresy. The goal is to get you to recant, to bring you back into the fold, but they're willing to put the pressure on to get you right thinking. All right, so let's look at some of these people. One of the things you're going to find out as we go through this is that if your name is John, there's a strong likelihood you're going to be a reformer. There's a lot of Johns. So this John is Wycliffe, and maybe some of you know that name Wycliffe. Does anyone know that name? How do you know it?
There's like a ministry that translates Bibles.
Yeah, excellent. Wycliffe Bible Translators. Sorry, I have to hand these out before I forget. Sorry. So, John Wycliffe is an Englishman. He's born in 1320, and he speaks against corruption. Well, what corruption? Well, the corruption in the church. Priests and popes and monks doing things that they shouldn't. This is an old story. And like the Waldensians, he says we got to get back to basics. So that's a common theme with these reformers. It lets us know that it wasn't just the imagination of one or two people, that there was a widespread belief that the church had just gotten too fancy. It was spending way too much money on things and stuff and just more concerned about the power and wealth of the world than actually completing Jesus' mission. And he translates the Bible into English. And you saw in our film, Prince Frederick, his reaction, he cherishes the Bible in German, right? But then immediately he thinks, oh, this is going to be divisive. And that's exactly it. Because if the Bible is only in Latin, then only people who know Latin can read the Bible and understand it. And if you know Latin, you're in the church, then you can make the claim, okay, we will be the ones that read it to you because you can't read it for yourself, so we'll help you do that. But now you give them a book in the vernacular, so in England that's English, in Germany that's German, so on. If you give people the Bible in their own home language, they don't need maybe the priest anymore. Which is true but not, right? So you can all read the Bible, but I certainly am not going to trust my opinion because I don't know Greek, I don't know Hebrew, I don't know Latin. So I need to go to church and hear a learned scholar, my pastor, explain what certain passages mean because I don't know. But in general, it's true. Now, what their fear is that if you give people their Bible, their own Bible in their own language, they'll read it and they'll come to their own conclusions. Well, we know this is true because of this. This is what happens when... I'm recording this lecture. Let the record show that I am now pointing to the tree graph at the front of the room. So this tree is the result of letting people read the Bible for themselves. Now, it's a good thing, but there's a huge asterisk there because, I don't know, I'm borrowing from Jefferson a little bit here. This tree is growing with what? Remember? The tree of liberty? It's watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants, yeah. So there's a lot of bloodshed that was involved in the growing of this tree. So that's the huge asterisk. All right. So he translates the Bible into English, and that's not going to be good as far as the Pope is concerned. Now he's tied to a stake and burned, Wycliffe, but his message gets out. And it's spread by a group of people called the Lollards. Sorry, my handwriting there. Lollards. Not LOL, because they weren't laughing out loud. They were spreading the gospel out loud. The Lollards spread the news. All right, got a few more minutes here. All right, another guy, John Huss. Oh, I misspoke. Wycliffe is not tied to a stake. This guy is. I made a mistake. Sorry. So scratch that. Wycliffe dies in bed. John Huss, again another John, 1369. He's inspired by Wycliffe. And he's based in Bohemia. I wonder if he was a fan of Queen. Bohemian Rhapsody. Thank you. What is the modern nation associated with Bohemia? Does anyone know? Do we have any Bohemians in the house? This is around where the Czech Republic is, or the old Czechoslovakia. So that's Bohemia. And here's the thing that gets him in trouble and gets him tied to a stake. Sorry. Is he says you can be in, but still out. And one of our theses that I noticed in the hallway is just because you go to church doesn't mean you're a Christian. That's what he's talking about. That's what Huss is saying. He says just because you are in the church, and what he means there is of the church, because you wear a special uniform that denotes you to be a priest or a monk or even go way to the top, the Pope. You could be a part of Catholic Church enterprises, but that doesn't mean you're one of the elect. Huh? So you could be in, but still out. Well, this is not going to fly again. Is John Huss speaking truth? Absolutely. But that's not a concern for the Catholic Church necessarily at the time. Burned as a heretic. That's the guy. John Huss. All right, so we're going to stop there. It's a convenient place.